All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is January the 30th, 2026, and the video I'm recording today is for the full moon in Leo, which is happening a couple days from now. At the time of recording this, I'm pretty sure the moon's in Cancer, so we got a couple days before we get the full moon in Leo. And I don't know. A lot of stuff has obviously been going on in the news, current events. Um, I'm not going to be doing a comprehensive rundown of everything that's going on, but I think one thing that's interesting relating to it at that level of uh, international politics and all this kind of stuff. I'm a Canadian, mind you. Um, I've been watching what's happening in the States, and it looks like people are calling for a general strike around the time that this full moon is happening, right? To start and it's interesting because I don't think in my lifetime we've seen anything like this in the United States. It looks like at the point in time when I'm making this, they're kind of like they're trying to maybe bargain a little bit, or they're making some kind of deal to fund ICE for 2 weeks or something like that. But the general strike is to basically defund ICE, defund Homeland Security. I don't know. I'm not a political pundit, so I'm not going to be giving the most in-depth analysis of that. The thing about all this, though, I thought it was interesting for to like I've been watching some people talk about the speech that Mark Carney gave at the WEF. I even commented on some guy's channel saying that from the point of view of like a leftist critique, there are all kinds of valid criticisms that you can make about the Mark Carney speech. But obviously, he is a elite banker talking to the financial elite, and they're kind of limited within that framework, within that container of where they want to go in what they're talking about. And it's not that he got everything right, or that he delivered the speech that everybody wanted to hear or something, but it's just within those constraints, he did a good job of at least trying to penetrate through some of the falsity, basically, right? And if you stick with that idea of like penetrating through the false, there's sort of like an image that I've been thinking about is like there might be the appearance of things at times may seem like a kind of like a wallpaper, but it like, have you ever been in an old house where it's like there are parts where the wallpaper is peeling, and then you can like sort of peel behind the wallpaper and you can kind of see like I think we're kind of going with the Pluto and Aquarius. It kind of feels like the facade of our culture, of our society, is kind of wearing thin, and you can sort of see the different layers of wallpaper behind the what's on the facade. And this could apply to all sorts of things. I'm going to there's another to back up. I'm going to change topics, and there's all sorts of levels in which this happens, not just the world stage, but at a more personal level. There's something going on with my family where everybody's got some form of health problem or other, I guess. My mother has been trying to, for the last couple of years, she's been going through some tests and getting some prescriptions and having she had some hidden medical issues that she's finally addressing. They're not too serious, but what's interesting is that we recently just had this Mercury, because you had all these planets in Aquarius, and we had like the Mercury Cazimi, and we had all the idea of like an insight, like a recharge of like mercurial insight, and it's in Aquarius, which is all about when you think about Aquarius, you think about like the guys in white lab coats and the technicians and all. And so my mother has a degree in agricultural science. She's university educated, and that her world outlook is very much anchored in a kind of scientific realism. And what was interesting, I thought, was after getting all these tests done, the doctor wrote a note, which I have to admit, it was very poorly worded, and I think there's a problem. I'm gonna go get into this a little bit later, but basically, the doctor suggested that one of the things that may be contributing to her health problems was licorice consumption, of all things. And now this is particularly interesting, kind of, because, okay, so from my mom's point of view, like, there's certain, like, she had no idea that licorice had these sorts of like effects on your hormones or whatever it is. Um, and I honestly, for our family, normally didn't eat very much licorice, but I got into the habit of eating licorice or trying to collect different varieties of strange licorice to try out based on a relationship. I guess I had. The funny thing is that it's like, to make it simple, I'm just going to say that it's like a couple of years ago, I lived in Nanaimo with a girlfriend, and it was, what can I say? We are both people that are on mental health disabilities, and we're both a bit dysfunctional, and it was due to that, maybe not the healthiest dynamic, but and also the fact that the girlfriend that I was living with had a number of odd habits that I was trying to. I'm going to take full responsibility for like caving in and getting into like the sex, drugs, and rock and roll a little bit. You know what I'm saying? There was rock and roll bars. There was I was cleaning up my life, and I fell back into a lifestyle that was probably not so healthy for me. But in the midst of all this, there's a certain habit that is kind of less obviously like a bad habit, and this was that when we first started like hanging out, me and this girl, she took me to a shop which was a boutique licorice store that specialized entirely in like fancy boutique licorice, and I didn't even know such a thing existed, basically, right? And this, like, there's a whole world of licorice that, like, it's, and I'm kind of like, well, it seems like a harmless enough habit for me anyways, right? So it was after I was living in Vancouver Island, living in Nanaimo from 2019 to 2021, and then I moved back in with my family, and then after that I proceeded to get really sick with autoimmune problems, right? And over the years, as I've been recovering from all this, I have been avoiding. I broke up with that girlfriend, and I'm not talking to her anymore because it's just too. It just seems like dealing with a lot of stress and drama, and everything's complicated enough as it is, And I'm just telling it like it is, as the best I can. But I have to admit that there's certain things that I still like eating licorice. Okay, and in the town that I live, they happen to have a import candy section where you can get all kinds of licorice from Holland and like different countries and stuff like that. And so I began experimenting with collecting and buying all sorts of licorice. And then what's interesting about this is that this led me to find a certain brand of all sorts. And this was actually my girlfriend, when I was living with her, bought these all sorts candies, which is something that I would never buy, but she just bought them and she had them around. And then and then I found that after trying out a few different brands of all sorts, there is this one particular brand called Gwoon, Gwoon. I think that's what it's called. Anyways, there's this one kind of brand of all sorts that's just way higher quality than another brand, and I just got really into eating all. And then the thing is, so when my mom noticed me eating these all sorts, and she's like, "Oh, Dan, you know what? Your grandfather loved those. So my grandfather, right? So this is the whole thing. My grandfather was a World War II fighter pilot who trained to fly Spitfires, but he never saw combat, right? Because the thing is, one of the things is that he lied about his age because he was a little bit too young to go into the Air Force. But as you can imagine, as a young man who's full of probably like testosterone and bravado and all this he was just eager to like I want to fly a spit. So he was doing all these like Spitfire training things and all this kind of stuff. And because of that, he was given he had social mobility, right? He was working class. He worked in the mines, right? And this is the whole thing. I think generationally, as millennials, we feel like we're kind of like weak and feeble, little like we're insecure about being tough and manly and all this kind of stuff because we can see that from our there's the generation that got through World War One and World War Two, and then there's the baby boomers, and then there's us, and we just like there's always this kind of sense that you're like your grandfather who flew a Spitfire fighter pilot is like some tough dude, and you don't really measure up to him, right? Or at least I don't know. I'm not signing up for the Air Force anytime soon. I don't think, right? But this is where I come from, basically. I come from a family who has a certain degree of privilege and social status, social hierarchy that was basically done as a kind of a quid pro quo thing. You scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. You volunteer yourself to be a pilot in the Air Force, and we will return the favor by giving you an education that makes you a lawyer and raises you from the working class to the middle class, right? So it's from this position that. And I don't know. There's also perhaps a whole history of intergenerational trauma that I'm not going to unpack and go into right now. But there's some kind of thing where, for me, from my mom's point of view, as being a university-educated scientist, she sees this entirely in like what kind of chemicals are in the licorice and how the licorice acts on some apparently. Licorice. I thought there was a herbal tea called Egyptian licorice, right? I don't know, my hair. Anyways, what am I trying to say here? There's this thing about all this where, from my mom's perspective, it's all just about like, oh, for some reason I started eating this thing that is completely the wrong thing for me to eat for my health condition, and that's basically it, right? But from my perspective, it's a lot more than that because it's not just some chemical. It's something that has a story that has to do with my ex-girlfriend, and it has to do with my mother's, my grandparents, and the habits of the people that I'm in relationship with, the habits of the people that I come from my heritage, all this kind of stuff, and that there's some kind of like at our body, our bodies are like these unconscious machines, and it's something about like there's some kind of like pattern, intergenerational pattern with illness in the family and licorice consumption and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that I noticed, I recently came across this idea about the problem about the education system. I talked about this in my last video about how Texas is banning Play-Doh, right? And there's this weird polarization that's happening between STEM and the arts, right? And I was watching a YouTuber who suggested something that I hadn't really heard of before, which was like, what if you like, hold on, is STEM what science, technology, engineering, and medicine, or mechanics? I think it's medicine. Right? If it's medicine, it makes more sense because that includes all this stuff, right? If you take STEM and then add A to it, it becomes STEAM, right? This could be why the Steam, the video game platform, got its name, right? Because it's like the idea of technology combined with arts. And I mean, we even have, there's a company called like Electronic Arts, but all they do is like sports games, right? So I don't know or big franchise stuff, right? But this idea that there's like if you take the arts and you take science and technology, whatever that STEM word stands for, and combine them, what you get is it's not that these things are in opposition to each other, but the arts actually complements the science and technology, engineering, and medicine. The thing about this, what I've noticed, is that reading the doctor's note, it's the worst English I've read in my life. I mean, it's like it's like the guy wrote in language that's like it is compatible with this disorder. It is compatible with licorice. Or no, it's just like it's compatible with this, comma, this, comma, this, comma, this. It's just like a bunch of words with commas. And what do you mean by it compatible with? The diagnosis is compatible. It's like completely fractured, broken language that you need to like interpret. Like, what the fuck is this guy trying to say, right? And it's like, this is what's really, I feel like we've got this weird imbalance where like, if you want to go into the arts, right? You basically have it drilled into your head that if I'm going to go to study English literature, or if I'm going to learn other languages, or if I'm going to study the humanities, I'm basically going to be doomed to work as a barista at the bottom of the totem pole, at the lowest rung of the ladder in society, and basically just be like, you have to just like serve people coffee, and they basically treat you like you're garbage, and nobody respects you, and you're like, oh, that's your fault because you're a dumbass who decided the arts would be a good idea for you to spend your time on, right? Then meanwhile, the people that are really prized in society, or that we are really we need all these people in our healthcare system, but they don't know how to write, and they don't understand. Like, maybe I'm being a bit of a dick, but the thing is, it's like you've got people that are so overworked they can't even form coherent sentences. And for me, this is a red flag that there's something about where like, what if this is all in the name of efficiency, and we think that arts and the humanities are just inefficient wastes of time, but that if you actually integrated something about the arts and something about how not just looking at licorice as a chemical compound that does X, Y, and Z to your body, you could factor licorice into a story that has to do with me, my relationships, maybe my resentment towards my family, maybe the intergenerational bullshit that we've been putting up with for generations upon generations, and like these cycles that keep repeating. And what we've done is we've constructed a society where we are technologically advanced, scientifically sophisticated, but this has become a kind of like a veneer, a wallpaper that we paste over things, and that we say that this is how we're going to do everything because we're modern people. But like all you have to do is start just picking away at the wallpaper, and you can see beneath it all these other layers of meaning, right? And this is why I find things like astrology and divination practices to be helpful. Although the problem is that I'm still just in this situation where if I'm recording this video and I'm telling you guys, my audience, about it, I feel like there could be all kinds of people watching, so I have a lot more room to play around, and that I can think that people probably will pick up on this easily. But when I'm dealing with my family, they're like really in a small world. Like, it feels like I wouldn't be able to express the same things directly to my family as I would on here, right? And this seems to be structure to me. I don't know, if you want to take another layer at this, it almost seems to be structurally designed to be this way, right? Like that, to be that we're all so atomized that we feel like nobody understands us except for so we're attached to the internet, we're attached to online culture because it at least gives you the promise that someone out there might understand. But the system itself seems, I don't know, maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but it feels like it's rigged to set you up with, you're always surrounded by people who don't, like, or there's this weird lopsided thing, right? Where it feels like that there are, like, like maybe you listen to a record, you read a book, and you feel like you share a common understanding with the artists and the creators and the people in the world that inspire you, that you're fond of or whatever, right? But then that seems to be like it's a seesaw where like that is really out of balance with the actual people who are directly in your own grounded life, right? And it feels like this has almost been set up on purpose to be like this, right? Like it's like if I like if I had all these people around me to share my ideas with, then I wouldn't have the surplus of shit that, like, I feel like I'm like carrying around this huge burden of stuff that I've just learned it's better not to talk about. But there's plenty of, at least, like, I'm reassured that I'm not alone. But it's just a weird, it's like it feels like a really lopsided, unbalanced situation in that way. And this, you can see this playing out in a pattern the same way that we put so many we put all our eggs in one basket with this science and technology thing, and it feels like we forgot. Like, I'm not the only one, obviously. There's a lot of what I am interested in for online content is the arts and the humanities. And so I know that there are a lot of people out there who recognize this problem, that the arts and the humanities are underappreciated and are not well integrated with the scientific understanding, right? And this is basically what has been coming up for me around this. But you can also, I don't know, maybe there's lots of other different angles by which you can approach this. I feel like this is probably a more fidgety video because I can see in the corner of my eye, my screen, my hair is just not at, my hair is not cooperating with me. I'm more fidgety than usual today. But thanks for being patient with me and supporting the channel. I should also say that when making a channel like this, an astrology channel, personally, over the last few years, I've noticed there's been certain patterns around people talking about, like, the end of the world or something, and leading up to me making this video, the doomsday clock is apparently like 2 minutes to midnight or something like this. And it's like, I don't know. I'm not really that enthusiastic about like making like, apocalypse content, or like trying to tell people like what, like I'm going to come here and like reassure everybody that the world's not ending or something like that. But my intuition, there are changes that happen, right? It may feel like you're going through the end of the world or something like that, but if you're the kind of person who's suffered from a psychotic illness, you may have a degree of practice with experiencing the sensation where it feels like the world is ending, but you nevertheless make it through to the other side, and apparently it's not quite as cataclysmic as you. The thing is, people are incredibly small, fragile things, right? A human being does not need very much to happen for them to feel like the rug is being pulled from under their feet and everything that they know has been just, like, people have they're attached to things being a certain way, and if you change those things in any way at all, it's like Chicken Little, the sky is falling. There may very well be some interesting changes, but I don't think that, I don't think we're headed towards. I think Naomi Klein was talking about end times fascism. I think there's a deliberate thing going on where trying to put people in a very extreme state of mind where they're like, it's like the game is changed because now it's the end of the world, and so all the rules are just thrown out or something. It's not, and that's not the case, right? And if there could be some sort of like expect for some sort of really radical change, and this could just be we may be thinking about what the future is going to be like, and we're imagining some really drastic radical change that's coming, and then there is a change, but it's not nearly as dramatic as you may have expected it to be, right? This is kind of what I'm thinking. And there is actually, though, what is interesting is to get back to this general strike stuff, that it's obvious that if there is a general strike, this counts as a pretty big change, because this stuff doesn't happen very often in the United States, right? let alone like, well, whatever, in our modern era, how often do we have big general strikes? It's a kind of a novel event, right? And that if America finds this striking ability in the climate where there's this what Mark Carney was saying about what happens if instead of having free trade, you have supply chains that are basically weaponized against people, is that if you're playing politics at this level where the supply chain becomes weaponized, that Carney didn't say this outright, but he's kind of implying it, that you could very easily have the workers weaponizing the supply chains in the other direction, right? And the thing about there's like the question period where there's that guy Lutnick, he was saying something about how the Americans are basically tired of globalism because globalism has been a bad deal for Americans. They're tired of it. They've had enough, yada, yada. And Mark Carney was asked about this, about how like there's a certain kind of alienation or dissatisfaction in Western society. And Mark Carney he made the hint that like there's a lot of theories about this sort of alienation, but it's not really about, it's basically the Marxist critique of capitalism, right? That Karl Marx said that like when you have a capitalist industrial form of labor, the worker is alienated from the product that he creates, right? Like if I'm working a job in a retail store, I'm selling a bunch of stuff that I didn't make and that the people who made it are overseas and I don't have any, I'm just moving boxes around on the shelf. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't have any, and if I do a good job of selling a lot of these stuff, it doesn't have anything to do with value that I put into the things. You know what I'm trying to say? If you're working retail and then if you're working in the factory, you're just hidden away from the people that are using your products, and everything that we consume is like this, right? With the clothes you wear, the food you eat, the service, like most of this, and what the alienation is that in olden days, if you needed to get a pair of shoes, there was the guy in your town that worked as the shoemaker, and that you had a personal relationship with the people in your village who provided the services to you, and that there is what's interesting, at least, is that I live in a I don't want to dox myself about what kind of local grounded connections I have to my community, where these kinds of connections are still very real and valid, right? There's certain ways where these things are still there, and there's other ways where they have been eaten away by the forces of global capitalism, right? The thing is that there's in the same way, I think that it seems like the scientists and the doctors can't write coherent sentences and they only communicate in sentence fragments. There's some kind of thing where like the economists and the politicians have to just omit, they have to keep the communists out of the picture, right? And there's this whole one thing about why whatever. I'm brazenly open about the fact that what am I trying to say? I'm not a communist. I'm a person who is voting. I'm supporting the New Democratic Party, the NDP, Social Democrats. Okay, I'm not a communist. I'm a Social Democrat supporter. I had a girlfriend once whose family was Chinese, and they grew up through the famines of Mao Zedong, right? And that even if you have progressive values, there are whole generations of people who are scarred and traumatized by this whole thing about using something like a food shortage for political leverage, right? If you watched the Three Body Problem, the Netflix version, you can see how heavily in that show they really laid on this thing about how they don't want Maoism in the United States of America, right? So I don't know. I can totally, and I have to realize that if I'm doing astrology, there's a lot of people that are just really polarized against communism, and I want to reassure you that that's not my position at all. I'm a Canadian. I'm a democratic socialist. I'm not a communist. But there's a way that the whole structure has been built in a certain way where it's like we feel like everything's fake because that level of reality is like the wallpaper that you have to peel the wallpaper off before you get to that part, right? And then if you want to, I'm also kind of thinking, I've already used this for a video before, but if you want to, there's this video there's a story from H.P. Lovecraft called The Rats in the Walls that kind of like, it's like plays on that theme where if you start like peeling away the wallpaper, or you start finding the hidden room in the house, or you start finding the secret, there's a secret tunnel underneath the basement, and then you go farther and farther and farther underground and stuff like that. And if you are the kind of person who likes researching weird conspiracy stuff, there's a few years do you guys know the documentary Hellier? Do you guys know the podcast called Penny Royal? If you like this is what I was trying to get with the licorice thing. There's some kind of like there's something very Saturn, very black, or very like there's a certain like if you have the taste for it. It doesn't mean that could be all sorts of bad things or scary things that you don't want to get too close to, but there's some kind of like why people like whatever horror movies and the X-Files and all this stuff. Like there's some kind of like as you peel back, we have the veneer of our rational, scientific, modern society, and then as you start peeling away or like doing a kind of excavation, and then like who knows what kind of skeletons you're gonna find buried there is all I'm saying, right? And if you're maybe you guys are already onto it already. I won't say any more than that, but this has been. Whether you're having revelations about licorice or whether you're having revelations about what's buried, with the hidden tunnels underneath your basement, you may be there could be a time where people have been are getting some interesting insights. And I'll leave it at that. Okay, thanks for watching.